This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 2nd of February 2021, and I am 2J.
I am CS.
And I am Miss K. Again, in case you missed today's headlines, here they are. Death of a maverick, that's from the Daily Nation. The Standard, Nyachae, privilege, power and influence. And finally from the Star, Nyachae, wealthy politician who controlled Gusii politics. I think we'll look at all three headlines today together because they all talk about one thing. The curtain falls on Simeon Nyachae. He, former cabinet minister in, I think, 3 administrations. He was an untiring go-getter, and he unfortunately died after battling an illness for years at the age of 89, just shy of his 90th birthday.
Yeah, quite a shame.
It is.
Yeah, and I think even in the Daily Nation, they highlight the fact that he held almost every senior position in government, all except for president.
But he did run for president in the year of our Lord 2002 and came in 3rd after President Uhuru Kenyatta, who was then number 2.
Good try.
He truly is a Kenyan icon, and we see somebody who rose through the ranks, and it's quite a contrast to people who come out of oblivion and want to run for highest office. This is a man who started as a district clerk in a chief's camp, became a district officer in Kangundo, later became a PC, then being plucked from there by former President Moi to work in the office of the president as a permanent secretary.
Yeah, and I think on that point, as I read all these stories and watched, all the news coverage on him, I think it got me thinking about this dying breed of political animals that we were so used to seeing in the country. And I think more specifically, it's people who understood the craft of government.
Very true.
And I think CS, on the point you were making about people who just come out of oblivion and decide one day I'm this and the next day I'm just going to be, a politician or lead a space that I have no look, I don't want to say I have no right to do so, but I think just have very little understanding of what craft and need and, politicking is needed to, to hold that position. So maybe mentoring is something that we need to look into more. I mean, our president, Uhuru Kenyatta, he was mentored immensely.
Yes,
he came from the Moi school of, politicking. So I think if we can have more of that mentorship that is pushed on our young politicians, I think we're going to see great benefits from that.
I do agree with you, because we should be wary of people who are self-made. They worship their maker. We may need to have some crafting and mentorship. Mastery requires a master to teach.
Yeah.
One of the stories that surprised me here, and I think before I say the story, CS, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I like that contrast that's being brought out, because I prefer somebody who understands the mechanics of government as compared to somebody who takes pride in selling poultry as their beginnings.
Very true.
Speaking of history, they do say a story about how his family was shrouded in myth. It says a story that he was the son of senior chief Musa Nyandusi, who they say was exceedingly rich, and that there is a saying amongst the youth when they were growing up that they could see the reflection or the sheen of money drying out in the sun, because he had so much money that he kept in boxes, and that they got damp being in the house, and to dry them out he would take them out, lay them on the heel, and because Kisii is a very hilly area, you would see the sheen from where you were. I thought that was a funny story.
That kind of reminds me of who's that drug lord from Narcos who supposedly burnt $2 million, to make a fire because his daughter was cold outside. But I think, when you talk about the wealth of a politician like him, I don't think that it's the money that made him, I think the money was just a part of a very complex life. And I think especially it's in regards to his father. So that's why when I look at the headline of the Star, wealthy politician who controlled politics, I mean, really, it's such a value-laden statement that you're really not looking at the man himself, but his history, his family. I don't think it's necessarily him himself. Anyway,
I do agree with
you. I would suggest we toss the Star.
I agree with you. We're going to toss the Star. But first, I would like us to say one last thing. I think that you spoke about the craft of government, and that is the thing that is important. The 10,000 hours that they built, that he built going through from the bottom until he got to where he got. Yeah. And I think that, CS, you have a quote, and we're going to say that quote just as we toss the Star, but we have a 3-part criteria we use to judge the headlines for you. We ask ourselves 3 questions. Is this headline top topical or speculative, repetitive or groundbreaking, thoughtful or just plain lazy. I'm going to suggest we toss the star.
Please.
And we give a double winning headline to the Standard. And more so The Nation. I think Death of a Maverick is a good way to end it,
Very
and especially based on what he said. Let's go with our quote, CS.
I think I'll start by reflecting on the words of Sir Isaac Newton, who said that if I have seen far, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. And so when such men such as these, such as the late Simeon Nyachae, give us insights, it is really important to listen, because they know the mechanics of government. They've risen through the ranks. They have seen the ins and outs of our politics through various administrations. And I recall a speech he gave in the early 2000s. And he had some very poignant points that I find are very relevant today. And he said that Kenya is bigger than any one individual or party aspirations.
Yep.
And he went on to say that what Kenya needs is a coordinated and accommodative leadership of necessary reforms in the economy, and not a revolution. He then went on to say our country needs tolerance and inclusive leadership instead of disguised hate propaganda, which is a game that is played by those who are attracted by the sweetness of power for its own sake. And he concludes by saying that before supporting a candidate for the presidency, we should consider their history, because human nature does not change overnight.
Oh, wow.
Amen to that.
Right.
So double winning headline from the Daily Nation and the Standard. And on to the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Just like the headlines, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to break down the cartoons for you. We ask ourselves 3 questions. Is it humorous or dry, satirical or pessimistic, and finally, effective or just plain lazy?
Yep.
Daily Nation.
In the Daily Nation, we have a woman who is climbing up some stairs, and she has a gavel in her hand that she has used to break a glass ceiling, and she keeps going up. And the caption there is, how many more ceilings after the glass ceiling? And I think the only context I think we can apply here is that of acting CJ Mwilo, who the Meru court had said she could not sit in that position, in that acting position, because of some of the issues around her life, but then it was later decided that she actually could. What I think is that the cartoon has gotten this wrong. I don't think it's about gender. We know when we talk about that glass ceiling and what women have to do to get to higher positions in the workplace, because I think that the Supreme Court architecture has ensured that there's some kind of gender parity or some equity, right? That if the CJ is a man, that the DCJ would be a woman, and vice versa. What I think it's more about is the integrity of the highest court in the land, right? I think that with all of the issues that she has before her, before some courts, I think it's important that we clear those things before we let her take on that position of Chief Justice. I think that the best example I can give is from the president himself. When they went to the ICC, he signed a note or a letter, handing over the position of the presidency temporarily to his deputy, William Ruto, saying that I will return only if I am found innocent. I think that was the gist of it all. And so I think what Milu should do in, good faith is step aside. Nobody is denying her the position of CJ, whether acting or not. I think it's more about have your name cleared, and then we can talk about it later.
I do agree with you. It is an integrity issue, and we're also going through a recruitment period. Our former Chief Justice retired, and any woman can apply and is eligible to acquire the topmost post in the judiciary.
It is quite important that people have confidence in our judicial system.
Yeah.
And integrity speaks a lot to that. It is like what is said about Caesar's wife, that the character of Caesar's wife must be beyond impeachment.
Yeah.
I do say we toss it.
I would toss it, just for being factually incorrect.
Tossed aside. Standard.
The Standard, we have 2 choir masters trying to conduct an orchestral serenade of the youth. On the one hand, we have choir masters that are First Amendment visionaries, former Prime Minister Raila Odinga and His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta. And on the other hand, you have Wheelbarrow Peddler. Now, the song that they're trying to serenade the youth with, the Wheelbarrow song only has one line of lyrics and sounds like a broken record, whereas the BBI song is a whole catalog, a very broad discography. And when you compare the two, handing out wheelbarrows to youth and the opportunity for devolving funds to create more employment and investments, I think I know which song.
I quite like how you had started describing it, and it made me realize so much about the cartoon in that it's two choir masters trying to attract the attention of one choir, right? And I think only one person can succeed at that. But if you look at the details of the individuals in the choir, some are yawning, some look crazy, some look hypnotized. And I think it's very easy for people to be hypnotized by that hustler, wheelbarrow, narrative.
I know repetitive sounds are good for hypnosis.
Exactly, that's exactly the point. That repetitive sound, and I think that's a problem, as you call it, a broken record. CS. You're giving people a symbol of backwardness. I mean, when we were colonized, what did the Muzungus give us? They probably gave us wheelbarrows, and we're trying to tell our youth we want to give you that exact same thing.
So what do we say about this cartoon? I say we put it in the parking bay for
it's quite funny,
2 seconds while we discuss the star. And in the star we have a caricature of a former Nairobi governor, Mike Sonko, but not himself. He is now baby Sonko, and he's wearing a soiled diaper and he's living in his poo-poo. And on the hanging lines we have a picture of underwear, and this is I think Jubilee airing out their dirty laundry, because that underwear is also quite stinky, and even the pigs say, I don't want to wrestle with him.
Oh gosh, this guy can't catch a break,
guy can't catch a break. He spent Monday night in police cells, and he's expected in court to face various charges. He was picked up by Muthaiga police station, and he was grilled by DCI on 7 counts of robbery with violence and 5 counts of relating to assault.
I need to know when these crimes happened. This is very intriguing.
I know, exceedingly intriguing.
But I don't know what we should have expected from somebody who said he signed over Nairobi after accusing the president of intoxicating him, and that he signed while he was seeing Ziggy-Zag.
Yep, I know. I think the saddest thing is like Sonko has become like the plague, right?
I know.
Nobody wants to be associated with him. Nobody wants to use the energy to even fight with him. So just like the pigs in the pigsty, nobody wants to touch him.
But I do think that this cartoon is rehashing. Something like this was done in the past of Sonko with a dirty diaper.
It does look familiar.
So I would say we toss it for repetition.
Yes, I think this is the first time that Gado has had a winning cartoon in a long time.
There is a lesson there.
Agree.
You shouldn't cast pal at swine.
We have a winning cartoon from Gado of The Standard. And now on to our final thought. But before we get there, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like.
And now our final thought. This week's theme is around achieving development agendas and goals. And we kick off the week with looking at We the Peoples, a UN for the 21st century written by the late Kofi Annan. And so at the end of March 2000, then UN Secretary Kofi Annan released a report entitled We the Peoples, the UN for the 21st century, which has become widely known as the Millennium Report. And it was prepared ahead of the Millennium Summit, which was a special summit, the 55th session of the UN General Assembly in 2000, the year 2000. And it was a very rare meeting of heads of state, and it was scheduled on the eve of the first general meeting in the new millennium. Gosh, that's so many years ago.
I know.
So the report laid out a vision for the United Nations in the age of globalization. In it, the Secretary General offered an action plan to make globalization work for the people everywhere. The most comprehensive presentation of the UN's mission in its 55 years at that point. And it contained lots of goals and plans for the initiatives they wanted to carry out. So in it, he attempts to identify the main challenges that plague the international community as it entered the 21st century. And he came out with a plan to address them. And I'll just start with a quote that he gives in the beginning. He says, "The central challenge we face today is to ensure that globalization becomes a positive force for all the world's people, instead of leaving billions of them behind in squalor." And he goes on later to say that if one word encapsulated all the changes that the world was going through, it was globalization. He said among its problems was that opportunities were far and they were not equally distributed. And he said, how could half of the human race have never, received a phone call? They don't have a computer. They don't have access to, basic technology. yet we're saying that the entire world is taking part in this thing called globalization. And so the book really got me thinking about two things. One, the role of the UN almost 21 years later, after this book was written, and two, the impact of COVID on this, issue of globalization. And so I think first on the UN and its role. I think many people forget the role that Kofi Annan played in the time that he was Secretary General. He was the 7th Secretary General, and he played in that capacity from 1997 to 2006. And let me tell you guys, so many things happened in this period. We can just go through a brief list of them. One, NATO intervened militarily in Kosovo, and this was without the approval of the UN Security Council. This was in 1999. In 2000, Kofi Annan unveils the Millennium Development Goals, which then became the Sustainable Development Goals. Exactly. Then in 2001, both Kofi Annan and the United Nations jointly got awarded the UN Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. And then we have 9/11 happen. Then immediately after that, the US invades Afghanistan. Following that, they invade Iraq. Just so many things happening, so much turmoil going on in the world. And at that time, I think we looked at the UN like this be all and end all of, bringing the world together. I don't know if that applies so much anymore. I remember when I was younger, I really wanted to be the UN Secretary General. I don't think I see the UN as being so relevant anymore. And the second thing was about globalization. And I think globalization is so pegged on mobility, on strong economies, and in some regards on just basic healthcare systems. And I think, if anything, what COVID has told us is so many of those things are so fragile. And can we say that globalization is as important in 2021 as it was in the year 2000? Look at Kenya, look at Africa. We realized that we can be self-sufficient. We built our own hospital beds. We made our own masks, our own hand sanitizer. So does globalization hold that same importance it did over 20 years ago as it does today? I don't know.
I think that I'll continue from where you said, and I wanted to focus on the continuing relevance of the United Nations. He has a section within We the Peoples titled Renewing the United Nations, where he begins by stating the importance of the United Nations, at least from his perspective. He says that we remain the only global institution with the legitimacy and scope that derive from universal membership and a mandate that encompasses development, security, and human rights, as well as the environment. In a sense, he says, the United Nations is unique in world affairs. Then he says that our influence and impact is far greater than many believe is the case. But why, he says, because their influence is not derived from an exercise of power. They acknowledge that they have no independent military that they can exercise. But what they have is that they have power from the force of the values they represent, and from their role in establishing and sustaining global norms, and from their ability to stimulate global concern and action. He says that they enjoy trust for the practical work that they do on the ground to improve people's lives. So according to Kofi Annan at the time, the UN was valuable because it created global norms and principles. So almost 20 years later, I agree with you, Tuje. What is the continuing relevance of the United Nations, and especially with the impact that COVID has had on the world? I'm going to ask a couple of questions. So, the pandemic has, because of the immense human and economic loss that has happened as a result of the pandemic, some individuals and some countries have floated the idea of filing cases against and complaints against China and other countries, maybe US, for how they handled the pandemic. But can you prove negligence and violation of an international human right or an international obligation? And can you get compensation? And would the UN bodies be able to enforce it?
No.
I don't know. Another thing is that the pandemic has proved that health is a cross-border issue. So pre-pandemic, a lot of countries, and there were a lot of treaties that have been signed. A lot of global health issues have been brought about by the pandemic, but a lot of health treaties were signed, accepted, and ratified by states, but they remain inapplicable because everyone always said, you know what, health is a national issue. It is a border issue. We will deal with our own problems. But in the light of what has happened and how our borders shut down because of health, are we going to see the emergence and development of a new branch of international health law as a new branch of international law? I don't know. And I could ask more questions, but I think what needs to happen is really another Kofi Annan moment. Because the importance of We the People is that there was a bit of introspection and self-reflection within the UN, looking at where they stand from the 1945 when they were formed and the end of the Cold War and the security agenda that they had and its continuing diminishing relevance. And asking themselves, are we relevant? Can we keep up with the times? And how are we going to maintain this relevance as the world around us continues to change?
I think, you know what's so weird? Everybody knew Kofi Annan, followed by Ban Ki-moon. Let me ask our audience, who is the current UN Secretary General?
I don't know.
Exactly. Most people I know don't know.
Antonio Gutierrez.
And, there we go.
Some of the questions you raise, I think, are quite existential. And there are some of the questions, I think, in a different form that brought an end to the League of Nations and had it rebirthed as the United Nations. So I think it's a time that we try and reimagine a United Nations for a time, which is the tagline of the book, interestingly enough. And it is quite an ambitious book as well as an intimate one. I say it's an ambitious book because of the breadth of heavy laden issues that were covered in it. And in fact, I dare say that if we didn't know that it was Kofi Annan who wrote the book, I'd be quite hard pressed to imagine that someone would dare cover such a breadth of subjects in one text. But it's also an intimate book because it affords us an opportunity to see the world through the eyes of a man, a steady hand that was at the helm of the United Nations for a long time, and especially through very tumultuous periods. And I think the issue that stood out for me was what he said about youth and education, because in sort of deriving principles from the world that he saw around him, he singled out three global issues for a time: freedom from want, freedom from fear, and freedom of future generations to sustain their lives on the planet. And it is on this third one that he then went on to share his thoughts on education. And he argued that one of the key themes that young people, or that should animate our thoughts in this modern world, is how young people are given chances to go to school and to find work and to contribute largely to economic development and social progress. And what he says is that if we deny youth these opportunities, then we are complicit in wasting human potential, and worse still, we end up with a youth population that is destructive and very unproductive. He therefore asserts that education is the key to the new global economy, from primary school all the way to lifelong learning. And as much as he acknowledges that it's a huge challenge that millions of children do not have access to education, I love the fact that he says demography is not destiny, and so this challenge can be overcome in our time.
Wow.
I think that those are very important words, but I would also like to add a little bit. Even as we think about education being the be-all and end-all, once you have access to education, your outcomes would be changed. I'd like to think that COVID-19 showed us that there are inequalities where we didn't think there were. A lot of children, when schools shut down, a lot of children who do not have access to parents who would be home and be able to supervise their education, or do not have access to technological devices that allowed them to view this new online schooling that we had, were subject to inequalities. And this was across the world. It didn't matter where you were from, because I know we'd all assume that the West would be fine and the South would not. But this is across the board, because there are children in the South whose education outcomes continued. And I think that there would be need to amp up education, because some of those inequalities may play out in different ways as we move into the future. Some children may never recover from what they lost because of COVID-19. Today we had a winning headline, a double winning headline from the Daily Nation and the Standard. We had a winning cartoon from Gado of the Standard. It's been quite a while. Don't forget to find us on your screens. We are on Pan, Free to Air, Star TV, Star Times, and Go TV. Why do I never get this? I have dyslexia. I'd like to end with a quote. Two quotes, one from a gentleman called Norman Cousins. He says, "If the United Nations is to survive, Those who represent it must bolster it. Those who advocate it must submit to it, and those who believe in it must fight for it. But then again, I agree with a gentleman called Timothy Tahane, who was the Minister of Finance for Lesotho, and he said that there is increasing frustration among us in developing countries about the prescriptive fads, about what works and what improves the quality of lives for all people sustainably. I'll leave you there. Maybe we'll explain it through the week. Have a great day.